Alright, obviously my name's Chaypin Buchanan. My study, part of my study was motivational techniques used during the rehabilitation of a Division III athlete. It was more of an original study than a case study. However, I did have a rehab as part of it, so it was sort of a hybrid. What you will be looking at during the PowerPoint is athlete history, clinical question, what motivational techniques I used and when I used them, analysis, results, limitations, conclusion, and further research. My athlete history, he was a 20-year-old male. He had a slap tire, which is superior labrum, anterior to posterior, and a Bankart lesion repair. The previous year, he had the same injury and the same repair on his other shoulder. The interesting part about his history is that he was very non-compliant during his 4 months, maybe showing up to rehab twice. Clinical question. The way I formulated my clinical question was in about week 5, I noticed that my athlete was not adhering. He had lack of motivation, causing him to be non-compliant with the rehabilitation program, whether that be not mentally being there or just not showing up. But I started looking at, does an athlete's motivation correlate with compliance and adherence during the rehabilitation program? The interventions I used motivational techniques, obviously, but the way that my definition for motivational techniques in my study was anything that I introduced to help him come to rehab and to adhere to it. But the motivational techniques I used were short-term goals. I introduced that on 129.14. Social support from his coach. Possible return to play pending range of motion. And after the study was done, I interviewed him I had a semi-structured interview, and then I also had him fill out an altered sports motivation scale, SMS. It's a questionnaire. This is a picture of the SMS. As you can see, it's on a Likert scale. There's 28 questions, hence the SMS 28, but this is the first page. And this is the second. As you can see, there's a key on the bottom. The key helps determine what sort of motivation you're looking at, whether they feel more motivated intrinsically or extrinsically, or a motivation. The analysis that I had was that I tallied up the differences in the rehabilitation attendance versus I tallied up the difference in rehabilitation attendance from when I introduced the motivational technique versus before I introduced the motivational technique. So how many he missed or how many he came to. I scored answers of the SMS to determine which motivation drives him. And here is my little table of the information. As you can see, your intrinsic motivation to know, questions 2, 4, 23, and 27, all scored 7s. So a 7 meant corresponds exactly. But what I found throughout all of this was that in his answers, there really wasn't that much information or difference in what he thought if he was more intrinsic or extrinsic. There really wasn't that much differentiation in his answers. And then when I tallied up the days missed, he had 2 out of 7 before and then missed 2 out of 7 with short-term goals. Social support from his coach, he had 2 out of 7 before because that was the short-term goals, and then 2 out of 8 after. And then for the make athlete aware of his return to play status pending his range of motion. 2 out of 8 before, and then 4 out of 14. The reason there's a big jump in the 4 out of 14 versus like your 2 out of 7, 2 out of 8 is it's part of my limitation, so I'll talk about that later. Okay, still didn't show up. But anyway, my delimitations, well, I only have limitation on my slide, but I'll talk about my delimitations. My limitation was that I only did dry land exercises. I did not implement any aquatic exercises. It could have stimulated. He may not have been as bored with the variety of different exercises. And delimitations were, I only examined one athlete. I only used certain motivational techniques that I felt comfortable with. And I didn't have a set time of when I introduced the motivational techniques, so there was a big jump in the 4 to 14 because I implemented the techniques when I felt like his motivation was lacking, or when he had missed consecutive days, or when he had reached a peak in his rehabilitation progressions. I wanted to kick starting. And for my conclusion, it's a lack of clinical-based research in this area, that I didn't really find anything that was directly like the study. I didn't find any literature that was directly like the study that I had. And literature showed great promise, but it needs to be validated, because with clinical-based research, it's all on validity and reliability. And my data was inconclusive due to the small sample size. So there definitely needs to be more research done in the area. If not, add like different sexes, different sports, different age groups into the research. Questions?